What's up, everybody? Welcome to the first day of the rest of your life. My name is Andy Zaremba, and we are recording here at our revamped studio. We've flipped things around because we have some new accessories in the room, and we've had some technical issues with the cameras, but we're here. We got two cameras for myself and our guest today, and with me behind the helm, who doesn't have a camera, unfortunately, because he's so good looking, and his hair is just golden and flowing in the wind all the time, is my brother Mike.
Hey everybody, it's been a while.
Turn the camera.
It's great to be back. Been busy kind of upgrading Floathouse quite a bit. That's where I've been putting a lot of my time, so I appreciate Andy kind of carrying the torch of Vancouver Real onward and just keeping the show must go on, as they say. So I'm excited to be back, and I'm really excited for the upgrades we did at Floathouse. And if you haven't been here in a while, definitely come check it out. We've installed 3 large new ProFloat cabins, which are basically the same idea as the float tanks we traditionally have, but maximal sensory reduction, that is. But they're a lot more voluminous. So I think if anyone's kind of nervous out there, this is definitely a great opportunity to tackle that with a little bit more ease and grace. There's even a little light inside for you. And also, they're easier to get in and out of. So people, if you have a bit more mobility issues and chronic pain issues, this is a huge opportunity because, admittedly, the tanks that we traditionally have, which we still have 4 of because, there's something to those too. It's more of a traditional womb-like experience, I'd say. But they are harder to get in and out of. So these tanks definitely open up that field a little bit for people who have mobility issues. So very excited for that. These opportunities we've just opened up over the last month here. Yeah, no, they're amazing. I actually haven't floated in one yet, but I really can't wait to get back in a cabin and experience the size and the voluminous and get back into the void. Mm-hmm. So if you want to check it out, use the promo code Vancouver Real and save 20%. Exactly. And what else could we talk about today? I could talk about a little bit about Man Talks. I have a Man Talks event tonight after this podcast. It's going to be all about personal transformation. It's called New by Necessity, and obviously this won't be out before then. Our next event is going to be on February 27th, and it's either going to be called The Warrior Within or The Way of the Modern Warrior. I haven't decided yet, but it's all going to be about being a warrior and like going out into the world and getting what you want and not being afraid to take risks and that sort of thing. So that'll be on February 27th, so keep your eyes open for that. And I think that's all we have. Cool. Let's dive in. Today, I'm really excited because we have a Man Talks alumni speaker with us today.
Thank you.
Second time appearance on Vancouver Real, Alistair Moes. Welcome back to Vancouver Real.
Thanks for having me.
The moose is loose.
The moose is loose. And you don't mess with the moose because he's known as the AngerMan.
It's true.
But actually, he actually helps heal anger. So he doesn't actually produce a lot of anger. He actually is one of the most calm and chill people that I know, most likely. But what you been up to lately, man?
Well, we're busy. We're running groups. We started a group tonight in Surrey. We're running groups in Burnaby and Vancouver. There's 6 of us that work here. So we see hundreds of people every year.
Nice.
And this is my 24th year running the company. So I've seen thousands of people on this topic. Today I was working with somebody in France. And yesterday I was working with somebody in Bermuda. So we're worldwide.
So it seems to be you have no shortage of clients. And
there's never been a shortage of angry people in the world, in my humble opinion.
So it's not going away. But what do you find are some of the common themes when it comes to anger? We can dive into some of the stereotypes around anger and maybe some of the negative perceptions or things like that. But what are some of the common general themes that cause people to be angry?
Well, and first of all, I don't think anger is bad. Mm-hmm. If somebody comes to me and says, "Yeah, I never get angry," I'm like, "I'm sorry," because
are you a human?
It's not a good side, right? I mean. Yeah. I get angry. We're supposed to get angry. If you're an athlete, if you're at a high level, there's some anger there.
You're trained
there's
to be
drive
aggressive.
and there's focus, and it can serve us. Mm-hmm. I think every big change in the history of the world started with anger.
Right.
Usually a small group of people or a large group of people got angry, and perhaps they actually stopped and took the time to get to connect to each other, be wise, be connected to their intelligence, their heart, and do something constructive with that anger.
So it can be a hugely motivating force.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And of course, people come to us because they didn't do that constructive thing with the anger. They did something destructive with the anger. And one of the stats that I've read was that every year the percentage of Canadians with hypertension, high blood pressure, goes up. Just a tiny percentage every year. So it's like people are so busy, they've got so many things going on that it becomes somewhat overwhelming. And if people aren't taking care of themselves, like, I don't know, maybe floating or things like that,
Thanks for the plug.
this builds up. And it builds up unless we're aware of it. So part of the work that we end up doing is helping people become more aware of what's actually happening in their body. So people feel a constriction in the chest, right? We've all felt that. Or the guy I was talking to today in France talked about in his spine, right? Back of the neck, down his spine, in the belly, lots of stuff in the belly.
Yeah.
In the belly, it's usually about worry. It's about anxiety. It's about paying attention to what we have no control over. In the chest, it's usually more around fear. In the solar plexus, it's usually we feel power and powerlessness.
Right.
Right. So in the chest, we love expansiveness and constriction with the fear. But in the solar plexus, it's more about shame. Right. And we need shame, right? If nobody felt shame, nobody would come to see us. We go, whatever, I wrecked you.
Oh, right. If they do
wouldn't
something
matter.
they regret, and then...
And so healthy shame connects us with our conscience so that we don't cross that line.
Right.
Whereas unhealthy or toxic shame is that voice, that inner critic, where we put ourselves down, where we say we're useless or not worthy or no good or a failure or a fraud or all of these things. So I think we all have both, right? We all have that powerful side in us,
Right.
and that side where if the toxic shame takes over, it's like somebody just hits you right in the solar plexus. We drop our gaze and we collapse, right? There's no power in that.
Right.
Whereas when we hold ourselves up, because we all make a lot of mistakes in life. Okay, I've made a lot of mistakes in life.
Yeah.
And we need to face them. You need to look them straight on and deal with it.
Right.
Address it.
Yeah.
Honestly, take responsibility. And that's where we reclaim our dignity. Because it's not like we're not after perfection. We're after improvement. So guys came to the second session of a group last night. And we see about half of the people individually. But in the group last night, session number 2, and guys come in and talk about how they're just paying more attention to all this stuff. They're noticing more. We've talked about some of the physiology, about what happens when we escalate, how people will get a headache, and it's because the blood vessels leading to the higher reasoning part of the brain are constricting. We're shutting that part down because the body's going toward fight or flight. The body's acting as if we're facing a tiger. And facing the tiger, we don't need to philosophize.
Right.
Right.
All about action.
We don't need to think
Yeah.
about complexities.
Right.
So we shut that down, or the body automatically does, and then we're left with a very ancient part of the brain, the brainstem. And that part of the brain is all or nothing.
Yep.
Fight or flight. Well, actually, there's fight, flight, or freeze. But most of the time, we're in fight or flight.
Right. Well, freeze would still be under the stress response, though. You tense up. I'm sure you're still very tense. I'm sure there's still stress hormones pumping through your body. Right.
Yeah. Freeze is a survival
tactic. It's like stop and let's assess what's going on before we take action, because maybe something's dangerous over there or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you kind of react based on what the situation calls for the most part, to try to get the best response possible.
Yeah, there's a couple of parts to that. One is if you're walking down a trail and out of the corner of your eye you notice a snake,
Right.
you're going to freeze. You're going to stop and you're going to check out what's going on.
Makes perfect sense, yeah.
But the other part is if we're overwhelmed, and the freeze response happens when we can neither fight nor flee. In that moment, where it can be somebody in a job somewhere where they don't feel they can leave the job because they have to keep their income, but they're getting abused in the workplace, then that can be quite overwhelming. Or a guy is at home and he's the one that's taking care of the kids, and his wife is cheating on him, and she won't leave, and he doesn't feel like he can leave because he needs to look after his
So a feeling of
kids.
helplessness.
Yeah, helplessness, powerlessness,
Yeah.
but also trapped.
Right.
Right. So in nature, you think of a cheetah, full-grown cheetah, chasing a small young gazelle, and the gazelle's running away, but it's alone, and well, the cheetah's catching it. And that last moment when the cheetah's going to bite into it, the gazelle just falls as if it's dead. It's like it's in shock. And it's last-ditch survival response because running, right? Flight didn't help, and it can't fight the cheetah. So it falls down as if it's dead. All the pain receptors have deadened. Inside, it's still like full on, like the gas is on full, adrenaline is on full.
But the body shuts down.
But the body shuts down, doesn't feel anything. So when the cheetah bites it, it doesn't struggle. Because it doesn't struggle, the cheetah doesn't have to rip it apart or kill it.
Oh, so it could be a survival
It is a
tactic.
survival tactic. It's a
Right.
last ditch. Nothing else is available.
So that's like the idea of playing dead.
And it's automatic. There's no thought. And so it just falls as if it's dead, and the cheetah will pick it up or drag it back to its lair. Maybe the cheetah gets distracted by some lions or some other predators, has to put it
Right.
down. Well, because it didn't struggle and get
Right.
ripped
makes perfect
apart.
sense.
Or the cheetah thinks it's dead and it just
it-
puts it down for a second.
That's right. It
gets
may
you
be able
getaway.
to take off.
Right.
If it does leave, if it does get a chance to get away, it'll run back to the herd. It'll run to the very middle of the herd, the safest place it can find. And automatically, the body will start to shake. And it'll shake for a period of minutes. And because, gazelles aren't really self-conscious. They're not like, oh my God, I'm looking kind of weird here, right?
Right.
So it just shakes, and it's expressing the trauma from that near-death experience. But if we have, for instance, a soldier who's been traumatized in the field, say they were driving in an armored vehicle, something blew up, a mine or what have you, didn't kill them, but they had nobody to fight in that moment, and they're soldiers, they can't leave. Same thing is happening to the soldier. Internally, it's like all this stuff is going on. And at some point that evening, back at home base, safest place he can find, the emotions start rising up. His heart rate starts going up to about 150 plus beats a minute. Feels like his heart's going to burst out of his chest. He's having a panic attack or an anxiety attack, part of PTSD. And internally, just like the gazelle, this is all going on in there, and it needs expression. But he's a little more self-conscious than the gazelle and doesn't want to look weak, so he just clamps down and probably isolates himself so nobody sees where he is. Hides himself so nobody sees him freaking out.
Maybe self-medicates.
Definitely self-medicates, alcohol, maybe smokes weed, or what's really effective is heroin or opium or fentanyl.
Right, because those are just painkillers, essentially.
That just numbs it all, and then he doesn't feel a thing, and it's like, woohoo. But all of that is still in him, and of course he comes back to Canada, and he's a little more reactive than when he left. And he's a lot more likely to become addicted. Until fairly recently, half of U.S. veterans were homeless because they got all this in them. They're traumatized, and they're not able to deal with life properly because everything seems so over the top. When we're holding trauma, when that trauma is triggered, it's just super emotional and reactive, and people don't deal with it very well.
So kind of coming back to the original question of like the themes that you kind of experience, is that one of them then? Is like PTSD, like can it manifest with anger? And then also like, and so what could other themes be? Like I heard like example, anger is a secondary emotion, and behind it is like actual sadness. Can you maybe kind of elaborate on that a little bit too? If that's true, I don't even know if it's formally true or not.
So two things. One is there's always a history. So there's always some sort of history usually going back to when the person is younger. Not always, but most of the time. And there's current circumstances. And so something's happened, and it might be sadness. It might be grief. It might be fear, guilt, shame, feeling inadequate. Something's pushed that button, and the person reacts. And it's interesting because it doesn't matter. Like anger doesn't discriminate against where you're from, how much money you have, where any of these things. It just rises up in us. And if we allow it to, it takes us over and we become egocentric. And so we always talk about driving. Driving always comes up, but it's usually about family. It's generally about the people that are closest to us, because that's where the most emotion is.
Yeah.
Like if you're walking down the street here, somebody calls you a name, and it's,
You're like, well,
who are you?
Unless you maybe are secretly like triggered by that for some reason, because that you've been called that before, then you'd be like, well, I don't care what he thinks.
Yeah, it's like and possibly it's somebody with some mental health problems, and you look and maybe you even have some compassion for the person. It doesn't matter.
There's a good chance, especially downtown east side, you're going to get a lot of that, right? Yeah.
But if it's your brother or some other family member,
we never trigger each other. We're pretty good. You know what? We've ironed out a lot of our stuff, to be honest. But once in a while, we get into it every now and then.
Well, it's important to that people allow themselves to feel it and express it.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you next. So, this idea of, processing your anger maybe, but what about sometimes when it needs to be expressed?
Yeah, well, it needs expression, but it needs healthy expression.
Right.
Right. So people come to see us because they expressed it, but usually not in a really good way. Right. It usually just all came out at once. We actually see a lot of nice guys. A lot of nice guys that, I remember one guy who played football, and he had like 6 or 7 older sisters. Mm-hmm. And he grew up. There's no way that he could verbally deal with all of the older sisters.
That would be an onslaught.
So he was a nice guy.
Right.
He kind of was giving in. And then he was this huge hulking football player.
Right.
And it built up in him.
Yeah.
And it built up. And then one day it all came out at once. And it was like, oh, my God. Probably the police were called.
And that guy freaking out is a different story, because he's liable to throw a table across the room or something. But
yeah. It's a lot scarier than his sister is freaking out.
Right.
And so he ended up coming my way. So it's important that when the emotions hit us, that we actually are aware of them. So I grew up in a family where the instruction, by example from my dad was just kind of being numb to it all.
Yeah.
You don't even acknowledge if you feel sad or any of this stuff. It's like you just don't go there. You just suck it up and pretend like everything's fine. That's what you do. But if you do that, and as you get older, you use alcohol to continue keeping that at bay, as a lot of people do. But of course, it doesn't work, because the emotions resonate through the physical body, and then at some level we interpret them, possibly, if we notice them. But even if we don't notice them, they're going to move through us. They're going to express themselves in one way or another. You can hang on to grief for decades. It's going to come out in some way, or we're going to carry it as shame, or turn it into cynicism, or
It's gonna manifest in some form,
yeah,
in a different way. That's probably going to be unhealthy, right?
correct.
Right. So let's say, for example, I feel like I'm fairly good at recognizing my emotions, and I'm generally pretty good at like down regulating, or even just like reframing and that sort of thing, right? Or maybe expressing if I need to express. I feel like I'm fairly well attuned there.
Yep.
Now, and I'm not sure exactly how I've learned it, but I think it just comes with a certain level of, you could maybe use the word mindfulness or awareness of, and just knowing when you feel those emotions coming on, being aware of them, and like, not necessarily just getting completely swept up in them. Now, how do you train people to learn a skill like that if somebody's like maybe unaware of their emotional state or emotions that are running through them?
Sitting still, which is difficult for many people, but
Yeah.
just sitting still and noticing your breathing is a good place to start. But I've had guys from my groups float both here and in Victoria,
Nice.
and I could tell when the guy floated regularly, he became more self-aware.
Absolutely.
And-
That's absolutely, because
and
what
what-
I was going to just add to that
Yep.
was that one reason for that is it increases, what they found in the latest float research is it actually increases interoception. So this is the idea of the sensations coming up through the body and being perceived by the brain. So it's like you're becoming more aware of what's happening internally. And if you're more aware of what's happening internally, you're more quickly to recognize those feelings, like as you said, like so many of them manifest in the body, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you can notice those in yourself, you can connect to them in another. So a study, we keep on going back to science.
Go back
right?
to the studies, yeah.
So they did a study where they studied interoception. Real simple study. All they did was look at whether somebody could notice their heart beating.
Right.
And they had something on one hand that was following the heartbeat. On the other hand, it was yes or no, just a switch, yes or no. Headphones that were either in sync with the heart rate or a little out of sync.
Huh.
And so they would test all these people. Some people, they could just lie there and they could feel their heart beating and they could be 100% accurate. Some 50-50, some not at all. They're just guessing. They also gave all these people a questionnaire that tested for empathy, right? The ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, feel what they're feeling. Well, the people that were really 100% accurate all ranked really high on the empathy questionnaire. People that couldn't feel a thing, really low on the empathy questionnaire.
Right.
Right? So this ability to feel what's going on in your body allows you to connect with somebody else's experience. If we're able to be with our own sadness, our own tears, our own grief, then we can be much more comfortable with somebody else who's also grieving or crying, and it's not triggering us. But if we're really uncomfortable with our own emotions, such as sadness or grief or crying, then we don't know what to do around somebody else's grief or crying.
See, that's pretty huge because, like, basically, not only do you start to benefit yourself by being able to better sense your emotional state and have that body awareness, but with what you're saying there is like it actually lets you become more effective partner and communicator and empathizer or whatever. It's like that's a pretty huge thing. So not only you're just doing yourself a service, you're actually helping you're potentially helping other people by being able to have a better attunement with them potentially. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like your emotional intelligence goes up because you can notice, and I think we pick up on. We have these things called mirror neurons.
Yeah.
So you pick up on what's going on in somebody else,
right.
And if you're able to be with that yourself, then you can notice, right? I was sitting at a seminar. there's like 100 people in the audience, and there's a guy up on stage, asked us to speak to the person beside us. Woman beside me talks to me for the full 2 minutes about the fact that she just sold her house, felt she got really bullied into it, and that she was upset with all of this, and then the 2 minutes was up, and we went back to looking up at the person up front, and I felt this sensation in my chest. It was kind of like almost like throw up, right? It was like, what is this? And I went, well, it's not mine, it's hers. So I leaned over to her and I said, you're feeling disgust, aren't you? She goes, yeah, that's exactly what I'm feeling. Thanks.
Huh.
And I went, all right. And I looked back up and I went, oh, there's something else there, a little lower. And I go, and shame. And she says, you're right. And she was grateful because that was happening in her, but she wasn't really aware of it. And when I pointed that out, it left me because it wasn't mine, it was hers.
Yeah.
Right? So we can also walk by somebody who's in a really bad mood and kind of pick it up. Right. Unless we notice, it's like, what is this? I'm feeling
and
this.
That's interesting because you get that too. Like people sometimes, and I've never really thought of it this way until you said it, is about the mirror neurons. Like we do have that subconscious kind of element to us of detecting each other's state and like reflecting it back almost or internalizing it.
Sure.
Because everyone would be like, oh, I can just sense, how you're feeling, etc. And, but they try to take like a more esoteric, mystical kind of, paradigm to it.
But it seriously could be that physiological process
which
going
is kind
on,
of interesting.
right?
So, instead of just dismissing that on people's abilities, there could be some hard science there too, which is interesting.
Definitely.
And there are people who are definitely more sensitive, what you would call them empaths,
Well,
right?
A lot of the guys that come my way, tough guys, but they've been kind of reactive. And,
that usually doesn't happen. That's funny. We almost never have distractions like that. That guy is bold. He's
Yeah.
really mad.
Yeah.
He needs to see you.
Anger.
Yeah.
Clearly. But,
Perfect example.
Yeah.
A lot of the guys are reactive, and after I've talked with them for a while, usually individually, I'll say, you're actually really sensitive, aren't you? And the guy goes, yeah.
Shut up.
How
Don't
dare
tell
you?
anybody.
Yeah.
But they are very sensitive, and once they're more in alignment and aware of what's going on in them, then all this emotion isn't taking them over. They're not like being run by the emotions. They can sort of step back and reflect upon what's going on in them and connect more first to themselves, but also to others.
Interesting. So it's one of those examples of how someone's pain can become their gift as well. Right?
Definitely.
If they're a sensitive guy, they picked up all this stuff and they've internalized it for a long time. Once they deal with it and process it, then they could like use that sensitivity to like become super empathic and feel what somebody else is feeling and be like, oh, so that's what's going on. You feel that in your chest. You feel like in your stomach. You have shame. I thought the shame it was interesting when you brought up shame because it's like maybe she felt like she was swindled and ashamed of that because she's like, oh, I should have been smarter. I shouldn't have let myself get taken advantage of like that. So she had the shame around it as well. So I could totally see that connection between, and it actually is a physical process of what's happening. So how can is there a way people can develop that further if they wanted to? If they wanted to become more empathic and be able to read somebody and be like, oh, I can sense what they're feeling right now. Is there anything you can do to increase that? Or is it just sort of an innate gift?
I think there's lots of things that
Or
you can
curse,
do
maybe.
To increase it.
Right.
And you need to be careful with it.
Yeah.
Right, because a lot of people that when they come our way, the emotions ran them in that moment. The emotions were totally in control of them, and they weren't stepping back and observing and noticing. They were just run by it all, and things didn't go well. So, as mentioned earlier, just sitting still, meditating and just noticing what it feels like in your body. Just taking a few minutes to do that every day seems to have a really positive impact. Another study that was at a residential treatment center for addictions. They have all these people there for 30 days. Half of them, they give them instructions. Sit still, meditate, But basically the instruction is sit still and notice your breathing. And whenever your mind wanders, just bring it back without judgment. It'll wander again. Don't beat yourself up. You just bring it back without any judgment or self-criticism. And you do that for 10 minutes a day for 30 days. The other group, they gave them stress management techniques. And after 30 days, they found that the group that was just sitting still, doing nothing for 10 minutes a day, just noticing themselves, were 70% less likely to relapse.
Huh.
What they found was that the people that were doing this 10 minutes a day, after 30 days, were sleeping on average an hour longer than the other group.
Wow.
And if you sleep longer, like there's a huge amount of people that don't get enough sleep.
Yeah.
If you get enough sleep, your brain works better, you're smarter, everything works better.
Everything.
Yeah.
Your memory works better, you can think more clearly.
You live
and
longer.
so you're going to think things through,
Yeah.
you're less likely to relapse.
Yeah.
So sitting still for 10 minutes a day, definitely helpful. But floating is fantastic for that because you're just there and you can just spend the time noticing what it feels like in your body.
Yeah.
And so when I float, I'll come back to the breathing over and over and over again and just noticing what it feels like in my body, because that's where all the emotions happen, and you can see it when people are, they're moving their legs or their hands or they're flipping a pen around, or and not that those things are bad, but it's like, okay, what are you choosing to do with this? So when people get more attuned to what it's like when they get closer to their trauma or their buttons being pushed or what have you, notice what's happening in your body and notice what you can do that brings you down, like that lowers your heart rate, such as breathing, just breathing through the nose. Like I'll tell the guys in the group, I'll say, so you're getting into an argument, your heart rate is going up, your blood pressure is going up, maybe a bit of adrenaline's kicking in. One of the best things you can do is shut your mouth, breathe through your nose.
Yeah.
Breathe deep into the abdomen slowly. Do that just for a little while. It'll bring your heart rate down. It triggers the relaxation response in your body. And potentially it allows you to connect with the higher reasoning part of your brain and your heart and your emotional intelligence, and then you're going to be smarter. You're going to deal with the whole situation better.
Right, like you said, connecting to that higher reasoning part of your brain, because that, like you said, shuts down in those fight or flight situations. Like it's like when you're doing something stressful, like public speaking, for example, and you're on stage and like your heart's going, and then all of a sudden, like what's the public speaker's worst fear for the most part?
Yeah.
Other than tripping, it's like forgetting what you're going to say. It's forgetting your lines, right? And if you can trigger that relaxation response, then you can, like I think it's the neocortex, right, which basically starts regulating. It's like the executive function within the brain.
Yeah.
So it's helping you make better decisions. So instead of just being totally reactive and in the moment and fighting, it's like, okay, that comes back online. You can be like, oh, I can step back and look at this a little more objectively maybe and calm it all down. So there you go. Breathe through the nose, right? And like you said, the meditation aspect, like floating, meditation, they're very similar. It's just different environments essentially. I think one reason people struggle with it is simply because it's not necessarily easy. That's one thing I think that people think that, when you're in meditation, it should be just pure zen and pure bliss or whatever. And it's like, no, it's actually challenging because you're just confronting that over and over and over, right? And that's what it is.
Yeah. And I've meditated for many years, and my mind is not like a still point.
Right. Yeah. There's so many things you can do technique-wise to play with that, right? Like, I was listening to, I'm doing the Sam Harris meditation course, and he's got this app, and it puts you through this, I think it's 50 days of meditation. And there's one exercise he does I thought was pretty interesting, is think of your attention as like a spotlight, and let it move around your body. So focus on your breath, focus on different areas of your body, focus on your mind, and play with moving your attention around, because that's sort of the same thing.
Yeah.
A lot of times in meditation, you're like just focusing on the breath or whatever. But you can start playing with that. So it's like you are, in a sense, doing the same thing, but you're just putting a different spin on it. And because it can be like, a little torturous sometimes, sitting there just going to your breath over and over and over, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing people do is progressive muscle relaxation,
Right, that's great too. Yes.
where you're just contracting and releasing
Yep.
with the breath. Start at your feet and you go all the way up to the top of your head and back down again. Well, usually people are asleep by, at some point within all of that
Yeah.
because it's relaxing.
Yeah, so it is. There's lots of things you can do, but what do you recommend to people who might be adverse to starting a meditation practice? Because it does seem pretty universally beneficial for pretty much everyone, but a lot of people tend to resist it. How would you recommend somebody start something like that?
Well, I think, a slightly different tangent is often when people come to me, things are pretty bad. Right? Nobody phones the anger management guy unless there's been some kind of big blow up. So usually they're very focused on the problems and what's wrong, what isn't working in their life. And oftentimes people haven't been sleeping well. They haven't been really taking good care of their diet. They're not exercising. They're not engaging in the things that they love. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I suggest to people is, what do you do that, takes you away from it all? I had a guy who was in his 80s come and see me, and I asked him, I said, well, what do you do this just for yourself? And he says, oh, I do woodworking. And I said, okay, well, and he goes on and talks about how he used to have a big woodworking shop, but they downsized, but he still got a shop. And he talked about these like really fine pieces of woodwork that he did. And I said, okay, so before you came to me, you had this blow up. How much time had you spent woodworking before that? Yeah, not at all. I said, okay, well, make sure that you prioritize, that you get into the shop and you do stuff. Because when he does that, everything else disappears.
Right, he's in that flow state.
He's in that flow state, and so that is very meditative, and I think just as helpful as being as meditating, doing things where we're inspired, and it might be sitting at the beach watching the waves come in,
Sure,
or walking at the beach, or out in nature, or doing some sort of hobby that just really.
Yeah, I heard a great term for that flow state. It's called experiential fusion. Because you're just, there's no separation between you and what you're doing. You're just doing the thing and you're completely wrapped up in it. Where like in a mindfulness practice, you're actually looking at the situation as more of an observer. But in experiential fusion, there's no separation. Yep. And I think it's a great way to say, I don't like to use the word escape, but it's like you're taking a mental break from your other stressors in your life.
Yeah, and it's not like you're focusing on something else.
Yeah.
And it's something that breathes life into you.
Yes.
Whereas when we're focusing on all the problems and all the disasters around, it's like, life is draining out of you. Right. I've had a job before where I felt like everything was just being sucked right out of me, and I knew I needed to leave that job because it was killing me. And at some level, I'm grateful because it kind of inspired me to do more of the work that I'm doing right now because I knew I couldn't keep doing that.
Right. And how long have you been doing it for now?
24 years.
Wow.
Yep.
That's wild.
In the counseling field since '89.
And how do you feel? Do you feel quite fulfilled with that career choice?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I love the work because we get to see a lot of men and women, and we run women's groups as well, create really positive change. And it completely depends on them, whether they decide to open up and actually look at themselves. But when they put that effort in, anything is possible. And we see great changes. So I get inspired by my work. And when I'm in session with people sometimes, the time just goes by so fast because we're in the middle of doing something really creative and the unexpected happens. I'll do work with people where I'll have them have a conversation with themselves. Mm-hmm. So we'll say a recent one, I had a guy have a conversation with himself, only it was one chair. It was him when he was really stressing about money. And the other one was him when he was really grounded, and he's a healer. Like he's done a tremendous amount of good work. But there's the financial stuff that just takes him over at times. And so I had him describe what this part looked like and sounded like, and the look on his face, and then I just have him finish sentences. So what I notice about you is, well, you're really distraught. I went, all right. I have him switch and sit on the other seat. And I say, I'm really distraught because, and he's just overwhelmed financially. And the first time a time when I was younger that was really powerful, where I felt this was when my parents were splitting up, and they were totally stressed, and they didn't pay attention to me. They just were all looking at themselves, and he felt completely helpless. And so then it was, okay, so what I need right now is, from that place, to be seen, to be heard, to be loved, to be taken care of. So okay, and I'm shortening this up. I'm going to switch. And so the adult healer in him, I say, so the next time I see you freaking out, what I'm going to do is tell you that I love you, that you're safe, that this is all going to work out. And there's tears through the whole thing, and it hits home because he's in his head all the time.
Yeah.
But he feels it, and he's completely present to it, and the learning happens right here in the body. It doesn't happen up here.
Right.
And this person was coming to you originally for like anger. He thought he had anger issues.
Yeah. Oh, totally. But all of this stuff comes out of him and harms his relationship with his partner, who he loves and who he doesn't want to hurt. But until he can really connect at a deeper level with all this stuff, he doesn't get it. And then the emotions just rise up and take him over, and he's becomes really anxious and controlling and what have you.
Right.
I mean, it comes out in different ways in different people.
The financial guy, the guy who had the financial issues, right?
Yeah, well, a lot of people have
an
emotional relationship with money.
Sure. I guess my point with that one too is, I think this is just a question actually. So it's great to learn like the coping strategies. So when you go into that stuff around money or whatever that happens to be for the individual, that's great to cope with it. But in some sense too, what about trying to attack the issue, or maybe attack's a bad word, but deal with the issue head on? Because like
address the
issue, sure.
Yep.
Because it's like, well, you might be feeling this pressure around money because it's like, well, he might be, who knows? It might be the bank might be foreclosing on his house. He's got tons of credit card debt, and that is a real problem, right?
Yes.
So, because I feel like it could be a two-pronged attack where it's like, yes, you gotta emotionally regulate, but then it's also you also have to deal with the actual problem.
Yeah, but probably he's not coming to me for financial advice on that.
Right.
But definitely there's a practical side to it that absolutely needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I'm not saying like financial, but just maybe the coaching aspect.
Yeah, and when that anxiety and all that emotion takes him over, he's not useful.
Yeah,
he's not good at addressing it. It's counterproductive. So when he's more able to step back and notice what's going on and be compassionate and kind with the part of him that's freaking out, then it's less likely that side is less likely to run the show.
Right. So the emotional regulation allows him to go and maybe be more effective in his life.
To be more intelligent,
right.
To be more grounded,
right.
To be more emotionally intelligent. Yeah, all of those things. So there's always a tremendous amount of complexity around anger.
Yes.
Right. When anger takes the person over, they end up thinking in terms that are very black and white, all or nothing. Not so intelligent. Yeah. But afterwards, when they reflect, oh my God, that wasn't me.
Then they're kicking themselves.
Yeah. And I said, well, you're right. It's not you. I mean, you did it. You're responsible. But, you're more yourself when you're connected to your heart, when you're connected to your intellectual and emotional intelligence, when you're connected to your gut instinct and all of this stuff. and you're aware of your ego, that part of you that wants to be heard and seen and get your way. So you can have a big ego and be competitive and ambitious, and still have a balance where you're connected to your heart, and you act like a decent human being. Right? Or there are a few examples out in the world where the person's just the ego, just the part of them that wants to be seen and heard, runs the show completely.
Right.
And then they end up acting in a way that's disconnected from their own heart, but also from other people's humanity.
Right. You mentioned that financial stressors are a big one for people. Are there some other common themes that you see that run through that people are dealing with on a regular basis?
Sex, which often comes down to emotional connection. Right? People get overwhelmed. There's so many things to do. They're so busy that they just don't. It's like people will put all their emotional energy into maintaining healthy relationships in their work or with people outside of their home, and then when they get home, they let their guard down. They don't put that effort in with the people that they love the most. Whereas it would make more sense that people actually put at least as much effort into those relationships that matter the most, which does it. It takes more, but it gives way more back. But people get so overwhelmed and tired, they stop putting that effort in, and then relationships exist between people. So I think of a relationship like a sphere, and if we put energy into it, love and kindness and attention, listening, then it shines. But if we're not putting that effort in, it kind of gets dark and kind of drops a bit.
Yeah.
And
Deflated.
it deflates. And people act as if they don't have the energy to do that. And I said, well, I don't think you have the energy not to do that. Because when you put that energy in, you get, people always say they get more back, right? People, last night in our group, we spent some time talking about compassion. Because compassion takes energy and effort. It takes some vulnerability. And you're caring, you're being present, you're treating the other person as equally valuable as yourself. You're walking side by side. But you're opening up to them, and you have empathy. You're feeling what they're feeling. This takes some effort. And so I asked the group, what does it feel like afterwards? It's kind of warm and expansive and energizing.
Right.
It adds to the quality of our life when we do it. But most men, I didn't grow up learning really what compassion was or what it meant, or nobody really talked about it. So I have those conversations with men because I think it's important to get some experience having these conversations that we didn't grow up learning, so we need to teach ourselves. Like the guy I was talking to you earlier, it's like he's parenting himself.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be like tons of gaps in our upbringing that need to be addressed later on.
Always more to learn.
Right?
Yeah.
So you covered financial, you covered sex and relationships. Are there some other commonalities? Like what about maybe, what comes to the top of my head might be like feeling bullied or feeling taken advantage of or that sort of thing. Because I feel like that could be something that would get people pretty upset.
Like taken advantage of by their partner or by somebody
I'm saying
outside?
in general, maybe they feel like they're being taken advantage of at work or by their partner or by maybe their friends or their family. Who knows, right?
Yeah, that certainly happens regularly. And often that goes back until they were young.
Because like you talked about the nice guy syndrome, right? And of course, maybe you've heard of the book No More Mr. Nice Guy. It's pretty much required reading for men in general, I think.
Yeah.
No More Mr. Robert Glover's great book on that.
Yeah.
But it's that nice guy syndrome because again, we bottle it up, and all of a sudden, then we one day snap and it explodes.
Yeah.
Right. So, how do you think that someone who does, is it maybe a people pleaser?
So
is a good way of saying it.
being able to talk about what it feels like in their body, because when we're being passive, which is what that being a nice guy is, when we're being passive, we're not honoring our own humanity, and we're sacrificing our dignity to please somebody else.
Yeah.
So first of all, we need to get real clear on what actually is happening and what we're doing, and knowing the history on it. Because there's usually a whole history that goes back to when you were a kid, and it didn't, well, it may have served us when we were a kid, where we had to be passive, where we had to please somebody who was an adult, a mother or a father, because, our lives depended upon it at some level, or that's what it feels like when you're a kid. Mm-hmm. And so it's getting to know that so that we can do something different with it. So we can relate to that part of ourselves differently and understand it, own it, face it. And once we really know it intimately, then it's less likely to run us, and we can learn how to speak up, how to say no, and how to say yes at the right time as well, for that matter.
Right. How to be assertive.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, but we have to go into our shame, because usually people aren't, they don't really want to look at this stuff.
Well, it's not going to be fun.
It's not pleasant.
Yeah.
But it's empowering.
Right. Mm. Well, it's like, the places we don't want to look the most are probably where we need to go, right? We talked about men a little bit this episode. What about women? What are some of the more common issues that women face when it comes to anger? Because I feel like, maybe it's a little more stigmatized around women, because women feel like they shouldn't get angry at all. But like men, men get angry. It's like sometimes men get angry, and we almost accept that. But what about for women?
Yeah, you think about when somebody says the term "he's an angry guy." Well, what comes to mind, right? I mean, maybe that even means he's powerful.
Could be, yeah.
But when you hear the term "angry woman," for most people, certainly historically, that would mean, well, she's crazy.
Right.
Right. She's a nut. Right. So for women to actually face anger takes a lot of courage.
Right.
Because of this history that follows us into the present and the future. And so the women that attend our groups tend to be courageous.
Yeah.
They're willing to look at this stuff and go into this place that, it's kind of like you're being a bit of a rebel. Because we're not actually, women aren't supposed to go there according to historic societal norms.
Yeah.
And so there's some power in the room, and the women are often surprised, as are the men when the men attend the men's groups, that it's just a regular bunch of women. Like there's, it's just a regular bunch of people in the room for the most part. You never know. There might be a wingnut in there. But for the most part, it's just people who care enough about the people around them that they're willing to actually step in and do something with it.
Yeah.
The women's groups, there's a lot more tears.
Hmm.
They're more willing to be emotional, and typically they're they have more experience with the emotions, because women are allowed to experience all the emotions, except for anger. Whereas men are allowed to be angry but not experience the rest of the emotions.
Right.
So men typically have more to learn emotionally than women do. But women need to learn more about anger so that it isn't this forbidden thing that you're not allowed to have. Because, as you mentioned, the more you push that aside and don't look at it, the more power it has over the person.
Absolutely. Right. Well, I mean, this is a fascinating subject, and I think it's one that so many people can benefit from when they start putting some of these tools and practices into their life, and it's a great one, I think, for people to try. Well, let's say improve, like you said. I was going to say master, but I think maybe improve is a better way of saying it.
Yes.
And it's just like, well, the less explosive conflict where we do something we regret in the world, the less we have of that, the better.
Yeah, if I compare myself to when I first started running these groups 24 years ago, I'll say that I hurt the people I love less often. Yeah. I don't go as far down that path. I catch myself quicker.
That's great.
I apologize better. I create change within myself better more often. But we're going to keep on making mistakes, and most of us make the same mistakes over and over again. We're creatures of habit. And I just want to really look at this stuff within myself so that I keep on learning. And I think that's one of the good things is we can keep on learning more as long as we're willing to look at this stuff. There's always more.
There's always more.
Yeah, it's a nonstop journey of learning, and hopefully we're improving a little bit along the way and having some compassion for ourselves when we screw up, because inevitably we will screw up.
Yep.
Happens all the time. Just let's try to do it a little bit less. But yeah, no, that's excellent. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to get out there today?
Well, at AngerMan.ca, there's a resources page with all sorts of podcasts and videos and articles and things that a lot of people find helpful.
And you're killing it on Instagram. I see like your memes, a new meme every day. It's impressive.
Moose Anger Management on Instagram.
It's just like, how do you produce all this content? I'm just like,
it just
good
flows out of me.
Yeah. Well, I'm just like, yeah.
I got to get a picture with you guys here too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. We'll definitely have you back on again, and anything new you learn, we'd love to share it with our audience. And yeah, it's always great having you on, and thanks for connecting with us and doing man talks like you did, and for the work that you do, because you're making the world a little more harmonious of a place.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here.
No problem. Well, if you like what you heard today, you could leave us a review and rating on iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher. That really helps us get found. If you'd like to try floating, like we talked about several times in the podcast, you can use the promo code VancouverReal, and that will get you a 20% discount on a single float. We have our new float cabins. We got tanks. We got a podcasting room. We just painted the floors. Gastown's looking great.
It is looking great.
Come in and see us. And until next time.
To whatever is.
To whatever is.
All right.